This young man is somebody that could stay at number one for a really long time and keep winning majors with that type of attitude.
One decision could decide whether Carlos Alcaraz walks into New York ready to defend his crown or watches another major disappear. At 23, that possibility is brutal. The tragedy of Alcaraz's season is no longer just about a damaged wrist. His inner circle now carries the pressure of choosing when to unleash him again, and what they are facing is beyond heartbreaking. Cincinnati is gone. The US Open is closing in. Samuel Lopez and Alvaro Alcaraz are supervising his work in Murcia. Yet nobody can say with certainty what happens next. That tension becomes darker when you remember what happened before the injury. Juan Carlos Ferrero had already left after 7 years beside Carlos. Lopez inherited the leading role while Alvaro's influence grew. Then Alcaraz crushed the doubts by winning the Australian Open and completing the career Grand Slam. For a moment, the rebuilt team looked vindicated. Months later, everything feels fragile. Subscribe now if you want the tennis stories hiding behind the official updates, because the wrist is only the surface. The real mystery is what changed inside Alcaraz's camp before this crisis, and whether the people closest to him can prevent an even more painful ending this season. That question leads back to December, because the separation from Juan Carlos Ferrero was far more significant than a routine coaching change. Ferrero had been beside Alcaraz since he was 15. Their partnership covered the entire transformation from gifted Spanish teenager to world number one. By the time they separated in December 2025, Alcaraz had won 24 tour-level titles with Ferrero involved, including 6 Grand Slam championships and 8 Masters 1000 trophies. Those numbers explain why the breakup landed so heavily. A coach who had helped shape nearly every major stage of the career was suddenly outside the structure. The public goodbye remained respectful. Alcaraz thanked Ferrero for the journey and for helping him turn childhood ambitions into reality. Ferrero answered with affection, pride, and one line that instantly changed the temperature around the story. He said he wished he could have continued. That sentence did not prove a feud, yet it made the official picture feel incomplete. If both men respected each other so deeply, why had one of the most successful partnerships in modern tennis reached its end while Alcaraz was still only 22? More detail emerged soon afterward. Ferrero later described a contract process that became the immediate point of rupture. According to his account, he received a proposed agreement and was given roughly 48 hours to accept or reject it. He said some clauses were unacceptable to him. That explanation mattered because it shifted the breakup away from the simple idea of a natural cycle ending. Negotiations had reached a place where 7 years of shared success could not bridge the disagreement. Other reporting added another layer. Clay and RG Media cited a source close to the successful Alcaraz-Ferrero years, who said there had been significant disagreements between Ferrero and Alcaraz's father about how the player's career should be managed. That claim should not be exaggerated into a proven family war. Alcaraz himself has not publicly accused his father of forcing Ferrero out, and Ferrero has not presented the split as a personal vendetta. Still, the report matters because it points toward a broader issue that had existed around the team for some time. Who should decide the shape of Carlos's career as his fame, expectations, and commercial value kept growing? The tension was not completely invisible before the breakup. Netflix's documentary series about Alcaraz had already shown a philosophical difference between the player and parts of his professional circle. Carlos wanted room to enjoy his life away from tennis. Ferrero and agent Albert Molina were more conscious of how quickly an elite career can pass and how much commitment historical greatness demands. The disagreement over Alcaraz taking time in Ibiza after Roland Garros became one of the clearest examples. It was not a scandal, it was a clash between two understandable views of what a champion's life should look like. There was another detail that made the timing remarkable. Only days before the split became public, Ferrero and Samuel Lopez had been named ATP Coach of the Year for 2025. Together, they had guided Alcaraz through a season of 71 match wins, 8 titles, 2 major championships, and the year-end #1 ranking. That honor should have represented stability. Instead, it became an almost surreal final marker for a partnership that was already ending. Lopez was the reason Alcaraz could move forward without searching desperately for an outsider. He had formally joined the coaching team before the 2025 season and had already worked alongside Ferrero. His presence was not an emergency appointment created after December. Alcaraz knew him, trusted him, and had experienced his coaching before the permanent addition. Lopez also carried his own long history on tour, including years working with Pablo Carreño Busta. When Ferrero left, the team still had a coach who understood Carlos's game and the environment around him. Even so, inheriting the main responsibility was a different job entirely. Supporting a champion beside Ferrero offered one kind of pressure. Becoming the central coaching voice after Ferrero's departure brought another. Every loss could be interpreted as proof that the old partnership should never have ended. A tactical change could be compared with Ferrero's methods. Any emotional moment in the player box could become evidence for whatever theory fans already believed about the breakup. Alcaraz then made another choice that changed the appearance of his inner circle. His older brother Alvaro was given a more prominent role. Alvaro had traveled with Carlos for years and had sometimes worked as a hitting partner. He already existed inside the trust structure, but Carlos explained during the Australian Open that his brother would become more involved. Later, he indicated that Alvaro could act as the main coaching presence at selected tournaments when Lopez did not travel. That move was easy to sensationalize. Family members gaining influence around superstar athletes always create questions about professionalism, loyalty, and control. In Alcaraz's case, the situation is more nuanced. Alvaro did not suddenly replace Ferrero as the technical mastermind of the operation. Lopez remained the principal coach. The brothers' role grew because he understood Carlos personally, knew the tour environment, and had spent years around the team. Still, the symbolism was impossible to miss. After the departure of a mentor often described as a second father figure, Alcaraz pulled his actual family even closer to the competitive decision-making process. For fans, that raised a fascinating question. Was Alcaraz building a healthier structure around the version of life he wanted, or was he removing the kind of resistance that had helped make him great? Nobody outside the camp could answer that honestly in January. The only fair test was what happened on the court. Melbourne delivered an answer that almost looked too perfect. Alcaraz arrived at the 2026 Australian Open, chasing the only major missing from his collection. The coaching breakup had dominated discussion before the tournament, yet he kept advancing. His semi-final against Alexander Zverev became a physical ordeal lasting more than 5 hours. Recovery then became a team effort involving Lopez, Alvaro, physiotherapist Juanjo Moreno, fitness coach Alberto Ledo, medical support, and the family members around him. The final placed Novak Djokovic on the other side of the net. Djokovic had never lost an Australian Open final. He was chasing a 25th major. Alcaraz was chasing history of his own. After losing the opening set, Carlos turned the match and won in 4. At 22 years and 272 days, he became the youngest man to complete the career Grand Slam. The 7th major of his career arrived at the exact moment critics were waiting to see whether his rebuilt camp would wobble. That victory changed the conversation immediately. Samuel Lopez had taken over and Alcaraz had conquered Melbourne. Alvaro's increased involvement had not produced chaos. The player looked capable of carrying his own career through a major structural change. For anyone who predicted an instant collapse after Ferrero, the Australian Open was an unforgiving answer. That made the next development feel even more cruel. That is why the months after Melbourne became so painful for the group. They had survived the coaching breakup, absorbed the scrutiny, and produced the biggest possible response. The next challenge did not arrive as a tactical problem that could be solved by changing court position. It arrived in Alcaraz's right wrist. The injury occurred during his first-round victory over Otto Virtanen in Barcelona in April. Alcaraz completed the match, but the problem was serious enough for him to withdraw before facing Tomas Machak in the second round. Initial hope did not last. Tests showed that the issue was more serious than first expected. Madrid disappeared from his schedule soon afterward. Wrist injuries demand patience because tennis provides very few ways to hide them. A player can sometimes shorten points to protect tired legs or adjust positioning around another physical issue. The hitting arm is involved in serving, returning, defending, attacking, and creating spin. Alcaraz's game also relies on explosive racket head speed and sudden changes of intention. His forehand can jump through the court, while the drop shot depends on disguise and touch. A compromised right wrist therefore touches almost every layer of what makes him dangerous. The next announcement made the situation much harder to dismiss. Alcaraz withdrew from Rome and Roland Garros after further testing. His attempt to win a third consecutive French Open title ended before he could step onto court Philippe Chatrier. He said the prudent choice was to remain cautious, evaluate the recovery, and decide later when to return. That language showed where the team's priorities had moved. The championship calendar could no longer dictate the medical decision. For the inner circle, caution carried its own brutal pressure. Missed tournaments invited questions, while fresh training clips encouraged hope. Fans could see a racket in Alcaraz's hand and assume competition must be close. His team had to work with information the public did not possess. Pain response, medical imaging, workload tolerance, recovery after sessions, and the risk attached to increasing intensity. A comeback date that looked obvious from the outside could still be irresponsible inside the treatment room. Then Wimbledon was lost as well. Alcaraz announced in May that his recovery was progressing and he felt much better, but he was not ready to compete. He withdrew from Queens and Wimbledon, removing the grass season from his calendar. The decision carried enormous significance because he had won Wimbledon in 2023 and 2024. A tournament that had become part of his young legacy was happening without him. None of that meant Alcaraz's career was collapsing. It did mean that his inner circle had entered a completely different test from the one it expected after Melbourne. Lopez had taken the leading coaching role, believing the year would be measured through trophies and tactical development. Alvaro's increased involvement had been discussed as part of a fresh structure. Instead, both men became central figures in a long rehabilitation story where success could mean telling a champion not to play. That distinction matters. Competitive athletes are built to push through discomfort. Champions often believe they can solve problems through work because that belief helped make them champions. The people around them sometimes have to create limits. When the athlete is 23, defending major titles and watching rivals collect opportunities in his absence, those conversations can become difficult even inside a close group. The Canadian Open offered another possible target during the summer, but Alcaraz remained sidelined. Cincinnati then appeared to be the comeback point. Tournament organizers announced in July that the defending champion had entered the event. For the first time since Barcelona, there was a concrete destination attached to his recovery. The timing also made sense. Cincinnati could provide competitive matches before the US Open, where Alcaraz is the defending champion. Hope rose because training footage showed him back on court. Yet the comeback plan failed to survive the final approach. On August 4th, Alcaraz withdrew from Cincinnati because the wrist was still not ready. That decision was more alarming than the earlier withdrawals for one simple reason. Cincinnati had been presented as the return. When even that target disappeared, the US Open suddenly moved from expected destination to uncertain deadline. The calendar now gives the inner circle almost no comfortable option. The US Open main draw begins on August 30th. Alcaraz has not played a competitive match since Barcelona in April. Entering New York would mean stepping directly into best-of-5 Grand Slam tennis after months. Without tour competition, skipping it would cost him the chance to defend another major title and extend an absence that has already consumed most of his season. This is where rage around the story needs to remain grounded in reality. Nobody has produced evidence that Lopez mishandled the injury. There is no credible basis for accusing Alvaro of causing the problem. Ferrero's absence cannot honestly be blamed for a wrist injury that occurred months after the split. The unsettling part is not a hidden villain. It is the amount of responsibility now concentrated inside a group that underwent major change shortly before the crisis began. Recent training in Murcia shows exactly who is carrying that responsibility. Alcaraz has been working at the Real Sociedad Club de Campo de El Palmar, with Lopez and Alvaro present, Reports from August 12th described him testing different parts of his game while continuing his preparation cautiously. Training partner Carlos Hernandez has also been involved. The images offer encouragement because Carlos is on court, but practice is not the same as surviving a Grand Slam match. The medical side cannot be separated from the coaching side now. Lopez can evaluate how Alcaraz is striking the ball. Alvaro can provide the familiarity and emotional trust his brother values. Fitness and physio staff can track how the body responds. Eventually, however, the group needs a collective judgment about whether the player is ready for the stress of competition. That decision carries consequences whether the answer is yes or no. That uncertainty is exactly why every choice now feels larger than the tournament in front of them, because the next setback could reshape the entire comeback plan. A return in New York would create immediate excitement, but the first match could expose questions that practice cannot answer. Competition would finally test the wrist under adrenaline, a full-speed serve over several hours, and the recovery response the following morning. There is no way to simulate every part of that experience in Murcia. Skipping New York would be painful for a different reason. Alcaraz won the US Open in 2022 and again in 2025. The tournament helped establish him as a global superstar, and he enters this season as defending champion. Watching another major pass without competing would underline how much the injury has taken. It would also leave the Australian Open as his only Grand Slam appearance of 2026, despite beginning the year with perhaps the most complete achievement of his career. The contrast is vicious. February ended with Alcaraz holding the one major trophy he had never won. By spring, his team was discussing caution rather than domination. Summer arrived without Roland Garros or Wimbledon. August has now become a race to determine whether New York is realistic. The same group that celebrated a career Grand Slam is trying to prevent ambition from becoming recklessness. Ferrero's absence hangs over this period even without any evidence that his presence would have changed the injury outcome. For 7 years, he was the familiar authority beside Alcaraz during difficult stretches. He knew when to confront Carlos, when to reassure him, and when to insist on standards. That accumulated knowledge cannot be transferred through a contract. Lopez has deep experience with Alcaraz, but he is building his own version of that relationship while handling an unusually complicated season. His former coach has also made clear that the separation affected him emotionally. In later interviews, he described the breakup as painful and acknowledged needing distance. He even stopped following Alcaraz on social media for a time, explaining that seeing constant updates made emotional separation harder. Those details destroy the idea that December was merely a clean business transaction. Professional respect survived, but the human relationship had been important enough for its ending to hurt. That is where the word tragedy in the title finds its strongest meaning without inventing disaster. Alcaraz did not lose his family. His team did not abandon him. Nobody around him has suffered the kind of catastrophe that should be falsely exploited. The heartbreak comes from watching a successful sporting family fracture at one level, rebuild itself quickly, reach a historic peak, and then spend months unable to do the thing it was created to do. The documentary makes that sequence even more revealing in retrospect. Alcaraz wanted a career that still allowed him to feel like himself. Ferrero worried about the sacrifices required for greatness. Their difference was not simply about one vacation. It represented a larger argument about control. How much of Carlos Alcaraz belongs to the champion? How much belongs to the young man who wants a life beyond tennis? Who gets to decide when those identities demand opposite choices? The risk crisis has turned that old philosophical argument into something much more concrete. Enjoyment and ambition are no longer the only forces pulling on the schedule. Health now has veto power. Even if Alcaraz desperately wants to compete in New York, desire cannot make damaged tissue ready. His inner circle must therefore protect the same independence Carlos fought to establish, while also being willing to tell him something he may not want to hear. Alcaraz's competitive personality makes the situation even more delicate. He has already shown that he can survive extraordinary physical tests. The 5-hour semifinal against Zverev in Melbourne was followed by a Grand Slam final victory over Djokovic. Experiences like that reinforce a champion's belief that discomfort can be overcome. A wrist injury does not care about heroic memory. If the body has not recovered, willpower becomes irrelevant. That is why the people around Carlos matter more now than when he was winning every week. Anyone can celebrate from the box after championship point. The value of an inner circle appears when the desired answer and the responsible answer may be different. Lopez, Alvaro, Moreno, Yedo, medical staff, Molina, and family members all occupy different roles. Yet every one of those roles eventually feeds into the environment where Carlos makes his decision. No public evidence suggests that the camp is fractured today. Recent reports show Lopez and Alvaro working with Alcaraz in Murcia. The danger lies elsewhere. They are trying to guide a 23-year-old phenomenon through a period where patience feels like losing. Sinner has kept collecting major success. Zverev has moved ahead in the rankings. Tournaments Alcaraz once expected to contest have ended without him. The temptation to accelerate the comeback is obvious even if nobody publicly admits feeling it. This is also why judging the post-Ferrero era after one season would be reckless. Melbourne proved that Alcaraz can win the biggest title with Lopez leading the team. The wrist injury then removed months of evidence that could have shown how the new structure operates across a full season. Fans who want to declare the coaching change a triumph can point to Australia. Those convinced it was a mistake can point to everything that followed. Neither argument can honestly turn an injury into proof. The more revealing question is what happens when Alcaraz finally returns. If he comes back healthy and quickly regains his level, the decisions made during these lost months will look disciplined. If he returns too early and the wrist flares again, scrutiny will become brutal. Should he miss the US Open entirely, the team will face criticism for a season that disappeared after such a spectacular beginning. Every route leaves somebody angry. Inner circles can become victims of that success. When expectations reach that level, sensible decisions start looking cowardly to outsiders. Outsiders can turn sensible decisions into ugly narratives, treating rest as weakness and caution as fear, while exaggerating coaching disagreements into betrayal. Alcaraz's camp has to ignore that noise because the consequences of getting the wrist decision wrong belong to Carlos, not to the people demanding his return online. The irony is difficult to miss. Much of the tension with Ferrero revolved around how Alcaraz should live and manage an extraordinary career. The post-Ferrero team now faces the most consequential management problem of that career so far. This time, the argument is not about Ibiza, training location, or the balance between work and happiness. It is about whether a young champion's body is ready to resume the workload required by elite tennis. Alvaro's presence becomes especially interesting in that environment. A brother can offer something even a brilliant coach cannot. Trust formed long before rankings, sponsorships, and Grand Slam trophies existed. That closeness can help Carlos stay calm during an uncertain recovery. It can also make the responsibility emotionally heavier. Telling a player to wait is one thing. Watching your younger brother lose tournaments while knowing he wants to compete is another. Lopez carries a different burden. His authority will be judged through results even when the most important work happens away from matches. A coach receives public credit when a player wins and public blame when a season unravels. During rehabilitation, the most responsible coaching decision can produce no highlight at all. It might simply be another week without competition. That is the uncomfortable reality behind the dramatic headline. The tragedy of Alcaraz's inner circle is not a secret scandal waiting to be exposed. It is a chain of real events that placed enormous emotional and professional pressure on the people closest to one of tennis's brightest stars. Ferrero's departure broke a 7-year partnership. Contract tension complicated the goodbye. Family influence became a larger part of the new structure. Lopez inherited the lead role. Melbourne delivered history. A wrist injury then froze the entire project before anyone could learn how stable it really was. Now New York stands at the end of that chain. Alcaraz can train, test the wrist, and increase intensity, but the decision cannot be made by reputation. 7 major titles and defending champion status offer no medical protection, while his extraordinary ability to recover during matches cannot guarantee what happens after months away from competition. If he walks onto court at the US Open, the first roar from the crowd will sound like a comeback celebration. Inside his box, the feeling may be far more complicated. Lopez and Alvaro will know how much uncertainty preceded that moment. The medical team will understand every step required to reach it. His family will know how much of the season disappeared while he waited. Should he remain absent, the silence will carry its own message. The group would be choosing future opportunity over immediate glory, even after losing Roland Garros, Wimbledon, Canada, and Cincinnati. That choice would hurt, but it could also prove that the new inner circle understands the most important responsibility surrounding Carlos Alcaraz right now. Their job is not to satisfy the calendar. Their job is to make sure a 23-year-old champion still has years of tennis ahead of him. That is why this story reaches beyond one coach leaving or one wrist becoming injured. It is about the cost of changing the structure around a generational player while his career is moving at frightening speed. Alcaraz wanted greater ownership of his path. He now has it. The people he trusts most have greater influence. They also carry greater responsibility when the next decision could shape the rest of 2026. The world will eventually see the answer on a tennis court. Until then, the most important battle remains invisible. It is happening in conversations after training, medical evaluations, decisions about workload, and the private judgment of people who know that impatience could be expensive. Alcaraz has spent his career winning points by attacking openings. His inner circle may now have to save his season by refusing to attack one too early. Whatever happens at the US Open, the Ferrero chapter and the wrist crisis have already changed the way this team will be judged. A trophy once proved the transition could work. Months of recovery have shown how fragile even the strongest-looking sporting machine can become. The next chapter will reveal whether the group around Alcaraz can turn a heartbreaking stretch into a responsible reset, or whether 2026 becomes remembered as the year a historic beginning was swallowed by uncertainty. Tell us in the comments whether Alcaraz should protect the wrist even at the cost of the US Open, or take the chance and defend his title. Subscribe to the channel for more tennis stories that go beyond the scoreboard and examine the pressure, conflict, and decisions shaping the biggest names in the sport. Turn on notifications as well, because the next update from Alcaraz's camp could completely change this story.